So, welcome to another video here at Back to Classics, and today we're going to discuss something very special. This 1978 Ducati 900 NCR TT Formula 1, as it is officially called. So let's dive into first a little bit about the history of this great racing bike. So how did it all came about? You have to remember the 1970s and especially the second half. This was the era of the two-stroke dominance in GP racing. And that is why Ducati, although they did an effort in the early 70s into GP, 500 class GP racing, that was soon abandoned after the two-stroke dominance really caught on. So what was left in for four-stroke racing was mostly endurance events and long distance racing. And that is why Ducati entered into endurance racing around 1975, and later this was taken over sort of by the factory-linked racing department of NCR. We will do a separate video detailing all there is to know about the NCR racing workshop and how they developed racing bikes for endurance racing and later also for Formula 1 racing. But to limit this video to a little bit of basic history, in 1975 onwards, NCR built a couple of highly special endurance racing bikes for Ducati riders to compete in international endurance events. But there was also a thought about entering into Formula 1 racing on the Isle of Man. And that is why this bike came about. The idea of Taglioni and others at Ducati, Franco Harné, must be mentioned here as well. These people, they foresaw a possibility with some mild changes to the endurance machine to be competitive on the Isle of Man TT, as they were already in 1977. Ultimately made its way to a homologation bike for the Formula 1 races, and that became this 900 NCR TT Formula 1 that was available as a customer bike in 1978 and 79. Now, very few were even made, although it was readily available. We think about 28 were built over the course of these 2 years, and what we see here is one of them. These bikes, one of them was actually converted into the racing bike Mike Hailwood drove on the Isle of Man to victory in 1978. So this is a full sister to that bike that won the Mike Hailwood famous victory on the Isle of Man in 78. Later, it also in 79 there were built a few, but by then it was really stretching it. NCR went further into making racing bikes into the early 80s based on the bevel twin engine. But by 1980 it was really well, a time for something new, which became the belt-driven V-twin with which Ducati ultimately had success in racing. So this one could argue is the height of the bevel twin racing era, 1978-79. Like I said, we will do a separate video about all the history more in a detailed way. But for now, let's dive into this specific bike that we have here in our workshop at the moment. Okay, so this original 900 NCR TT Formula 1 was originally delivered to a customer in Turin, which is why we nicknamed this bike the Torino, because it was originally delivered there. But it was also converted into street use right at that time. So a headlamp was fitted, rear light. There was even a registration on this bike, and that was probably done by NCR themselves. They created this bike out of the standard, so to speak, for whatever standard there was, of these highly tuned racing bikes. So this bike was converted as a street bike, and that is also how it was kept for many years. wasn't driven extensively probably, and maybe some track days were done with it, but it was not entered in any official race that we know of at least. But some changes were made as well. Like I said, the headlamp, of course, the oil cooler in a different position for the same purpose. And over the years, some of the original parts were changed to non-original parts. Some upgraded as well, but we're going to go over more detail later on. But in fact, it is in the basis a very nice and original TT Formula 1, but with some additions and changes over the years. The new owner of this bike wants it to be converted into how it was originally intended by the factory when they built these small series of TT Formula 1s, which means that we're going to bring it back to its original specifications without doing a total restoration, which is not needed in this case because we think the engine is good. More about that later. Frame had some minor alterations that we will convert back into original specifications, and some other bits that we can go over, but not a full restoration is needed in this occasion. So going into a little bit more of the details, one of the specific items on the 1978 TT Formula 1 was a narrow set of triple clamps, which made the front fork a little bit narrower than on standard models. And for some reason, this was converted into the wider version that we also see on street bikes. Which also means that the front wheel, albeit original, has some adapters fitted to increase the width and the offset of the brake discs to this offset of the front fork. Which we're also going to bring back to original specifications. Some other things that are changed over the years with the braking system. It has now a Gold Line Brembo braking system fitted, whereas it should be the normal shaved, that'll be P08 Brembo, front and rear, so we're going to fit those. The front fairing support, where also the oil cooler and the rev counter is fitted, we're going to convert back to the original. Then we can fit the original fairing again. So that is what we're going to do. Other changes included a side stand, which makes sense if you want to drive it on the road, but for a race bike there should not be any, of course. And it's also this bracket that is welded on here for the side stand also prevents the original 2x2 exhaust system to be fitted. So we're going to take this off and put the original bracket there for the 2x2 exhaust. That is with the bike, by the way, so we can refit that. The shocks mount was changed, as well as the shocks themselves were shorter than on the original version. Also, that is going to be converted back to the original specification, and then we have to cut these pieces out of the frame that were welded on later and make that original again. So, like I said, with the original shocks, original front fork, original 2x2 exhaust system, the fairing fitted and finalized. Then we have to do some work on the tank seat combination. As you see, there's a piece of foam missing that we're going to refit, and a lot of other details that we're going to address when restoring this bike. There's a lot to tell about the engine. Engine were specific for the NCR bikes and are very special. What they did, after some ideas they had to narrow the cases in order to increase the ground clearance so that the exhaust could be fitted closer to the engine on either side, they had cut a standard set of cases and welded in as plates, but the problem was that these cracked because of the cutting and the welding. That didn't prove to be too strong enough, I must say. So that is why they created a whole new set of engine cases specifically for racing these NCR bikes. And this bike also has this specific set of crankcases fitted. They're much narrower than on the standard round case 750, but also it has the completely different oil passage system with a spin-off oil filter and with external oil lines going into the oil cooler and then into the cylinder heads, lubricating the gearbox and of course the crankshaft. So that is very special. The outer covers on the right side as well. These are specifically made for the NCR racing bikes. This particular bike, so all the 900 TT Formula 1s, they have the standard alternator fitted, charging the battery for the ignition, obviously, but specially made cases. On the left side, we see a highly special dry clutch, all fitted to all of these NCR racing bikes, also specific for this model. And then going into the top end, we see a tuned set of cylinder heads, effectively 900 Supersport cylinder heads with tuned inlet and exhaust manifolds and exhaust tracks. So that was done. Hot camshaft, obviously, on a racing bike. And then a pair of Delotto 40mm carburetors fitted. This particular bike has an upgraded carburetor system by Malossi, based on the Delotto PHF 40, but with a different choke, which was specifically made to 41mm on this instance. So you could say a highly tuned version of the standard bevel drive engine that was available on the street. This was very special for racing purposes only. In this case, the engine is what we believe almost 100% original. There were some few changes non-original, like I discussed already, the carburetors, but that was a nice upgrade over the standard PHF 40mm carburetors. But also a kickstart shaft was fitted. Again, makes sense if you want to drive it on the road. But originally the kickstart mechanism was very rudimentary, and in order to make the engine narrower for more ground clearance, the kickstart shaft was very short, and a special kickstarter was delivered with the bike that would needed to be put on. The bike started and then taken off in order to not to drag that with you on the racetrack, of course. Normally the bike would have been started with an external starter motor fitted to the rear wheel. That is how it was done. But a kickstarter was available, albeit a put on and release type of kickstarter. So that is a non-original addition to this bike. A standard road kickstart shaft was fitted to it. Other than that, we can also know this bike had been standing still for quite a lot of time, up to 20 years. And the bike, when we received it in our workshop, there was no oil in it. So that was a giveaway that the bike had not been running recently. And before we now go any further into any of this restoration that we discussed already in this video, we first would like to know how the engine is running, if it's running at all. So what we did so far is we took off all the covers, made sure that the timing was right, that everything was in right order. Then just an inspection on the valve clearance, at least the opening rockers. We did of course, it was all put back together with new gaskets. Oil was added to the engine. The carburetors have been ultrasonically cleaned and rebuilt in order to be sure that they are working correctly. And the ignition was again put on. This is again an addition on this bike. It's not original. Originally these were fitted with points ignition, but this has a Dyna S electronic ignition upgrade that we just left in there for this purpose, but a set of coils was fitted, and we get a spark now. So this is now ready for its first start in many, many years. Let's see if this bike will actually run. So it looks like we are in a good spot here, everything working fine. Of course the carburetors are not in sync and a lot of other things we need to do, but at least we know the engine is running and running well. We have to check for oil leakage, but I don't think there's any. So that is a good start for this restoration project. There were some clutch issues that we found. The clutch is slipping in all cylinders, so that needs to be addressed. But at least we know the engine is running and it's running perfectly. So next job will be the minor restoration as discussed. Change out a lot of the parts, further service to the clutch, and then we will continue with this bike. Hopefully bring it to the racetrack on not such a long notice. So this concludes this episode here at Back to Classics. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. Toodle-dokie. See you next time.